Imagine a night of feasting, oil lamps flickering, red wine glasses overflowing, laughter echoing, and at the center of it all, a woman. She is no queen, no goddess, but her power, even in shadow, is enough to make Rome shudder. That is Julia, daughter of Caesar Augustus. That woman, carrying the blood of the most powerful man in the world, was turned away by the entire world. Not because of betraying the throne, not because of murder, but because of a more terrible crime, the crime of adultery. A crime that sounded so mundane, but was a death sentence for her honor and freedom. BC. The rumors were no longer rumors. They became chilling confessions. Augustus's spy network had torn away the veil. What they found was not a secret love affair, but a web of orgies. Secret affairs in lavish villa gardens, secret underground parties where Rome's youngest and most powerful nobles flocked to her like moths to a flame. Iulus Antonius, son of Augustus's former enemy, Mark Antony. He was more than a lover. He was a political threat. Julia's fall into the arms of her former enemy was not a whim of love, but a blow to Augustus's face, to everything he had built. But Iulus is just one name on a long list. It is important to understand that this is not just a story about a woman who is a prostitute. It is a story about power, about control, and about bodies turned into political tools. Julia, from birth, was property, a tool to connect, to consolidate her father's power. The evidence was collected in brutal detail. Love letters were intercepted. Witnesses trembled as they recounted nights of debauchery. And then, rumors of forbidden rituals and moonlit orgies became a haunting obsession in the court. Julia's name was associated with the most vile words: lecherous, licentious, shameless. Let's go back to Rome at that time. Augustus enacted the Lex Julia de Adulteris Coascendis, a harsh law that made adultery a criminal offense, punishing both men and women. The goal: to re-establish social morality, to return Rome to traditional values, where the family was the foundation. And then, his own daughter, the symbol of purity and exemplary conduct he wanted to uphold, was the first offender, and the most blatant offender. Julia not only betrayed her current husband, Tiberius, a cold and ambitious man whom Augustus had chosen as his successor, she betrayed an entire empire. The punishment did not come suddenly. It came in a cold, cruel rage. Augustus would not speak to her. He ordered her arrested, like a common criminal. She was taken to her father's house, locked in a bare room, and, faced with an unforgiving judgment. He had acted not as a father, but as an emperor who wanted to protect the throne. But was that really all? Or did this shame tap into a deeper fear, a darker secret that Augustus wanted to bury? Was he not simply trying to punish adultery, but to erase a name that could pose a threat to the stability of the empire? All these questions will lead us to a small, forgotten island in the middle of the ocean. The island of Pandateria, where Julia was exiled. And from there, the story truly begins. The story of a woman stripped of everything, but still has one last secret, a secret that can shake an empire. This is Pandateria. Not a place to live, but a place to die. The island is not listed on tourist maps, but it is etched in the memories of the damned. Pandateria is not a prison with bars and guards. It is much more brutal than that. It is a barren wasteland where life is a constant struggle. There are no trees, no abundant fresh water, only sea breezes and scorching suns. This is the hell on earth that Augustus created for his daughter, not to punish the body, but to destroy the soul. Julia, who had slept on beds of silk and goose feathers, now writhed on a rough straw mat. Her diet consisted of stale bread and dried fish. The guards, their faces cold and contemptuous, were the only faces she saw. They did not speak, communicating only with blank stares and short commands. The isolation was a torture more cruel than any chains. She was cut off from the world, from her family, from memories of her glorious past. Everything was a silent stone wall. But the most terrifying thing was not the deprivation, but the feeling of being forgotten. In the eyes of Rome, Julia was dead. Her statues were smashed, her name erased from every monument, as if she had never existed. She was no longer a person, but a ghost imprisoned in her own name. She became a living warning, an image of decadence that no one was allowed to speak of. During sleepless nights, when despair rose like a tide, she began to notice the carvings on the stone walls of her prison cell. At first, she thought they were just the scribbles of a mad prisoner. But then she realized they were in an unusual order. Not Roman letters, but mysterious symbols. They were constellations, but not the constellations she had learned about in textbooks. This was a distorted map of the sky, where the brightest stars were trapped in circles and the others were cruelly crossed out. Beneath each crossed-out constellation was a hidden symbol, a symbol of the most powerful men in Rome. Shiver ran down Julia's spine. This was a map of intrigue, she realized, of exiled powerful women. She remembered the rumors of Agrippina the Elder, the mother of Emperor Caligula, a woman who had also been exiled here and died mysteriously. Surely this was her map, a map of ruined lives. Just below the star map, there was one last symbol, a key. It was not a cry for help, but a warning. She realized what Pandateria really meant. This island was not a prison. It was a giant tombstone, where secrets were buried along with powerful women. They were not just exiled, they were silenced, and then she found one last clue. A small map carved into the rock led to a hidden alcove in the cliff, a message only a desperate woman could leave. Agrippina had left more than a warning, she realized. She had buried something here, something Augustus wanted to hide at all. Costs, a secret that could shake an empire. The question is no longer, will she survive? But can she lift the veil of mystery before it buries her forever? Under the pale moonlight of Pandateria, Julia groped her way to the cliff. Sharp rocks cut into her hands and feet, but she no longer felt pain. Fear and curiosity overcame everything. She found the cave indicated on the mysterious map. A small stone box, sealed with wax that had turned to stone over time, lay inside. Julia's heart pounded. She knew that the secret of Agrippina the Elder was in her hands. When she pried open the box, there was no gold or jewels inside. It was an old scroll, faded and brittle, and a simple brass ring. The ring bore a familiar image, a Roman eagle, soaring. Julia unrolled the scroll with trembling hands. Inside was a final message, written in faded ink, but the words were as sharp as ice. Those were the confessions of Agrippina. Not a confession of her own sins, but of Augustus's own. Agrippina reveals that Augustus was not the virtuous emperor he had made himself out to be. He was a hypocrite who had made laws not to restore order, but to control powerful women who could produce heirs and forge dangerous political alliances. Adultery is not a crime. Power is. Agrippina wrote that she, too, had been exiled to Pandateria, not because of any wrongdoing, but because she had refused to marry Augustus's chosen successor, Tiberius. She had known too many of the court's secrets, had seen through Augustus's true nature and the evil machinations behind his glamorous facade. She had died there, not of disease, but of a slow, silent poisoning. Agrippina's confession revealed an even more chilling truth. The brass ring was more than a keepsake. It was the symbol of a secret society, a network of oppressed noblewomen who had tried to overthrow Augustus from within. The group, which Agrippina called the captive eagles, included women who had been married off for political gain and those who had seen the truth behind loveless marriages. A mixture of pain and relief coursed through Julia. The shame she had carried had turned into a terrifying truth. She was not a broken woman. She was an unconscious warrior. Her wild parties and affairs had not been impulsive, but unconscious acts of rebellion. She had become an unwitting part of the network that Agrippina had created, a network that Augustus had worked to destroy. She had lived a controlled life, and even her rebellion was controlled, but she was no longer alone. The silence of Pandateria was not emptiness, but the echoes of imprisoned souls. She felt an invisible thread connecting her to Agrippina, to all the dead women. She had found meaning in her pain. A noise came from the distance. The footsteps of the guards. Julia hurriedly hid the scroll and the ring in her clothes, trembling as she returned to her prison. She knew that these secrets could help her survive, but they could also be her final death sentence. Augustus had failed to kill the truth with the death of Agrippina. But would he let Julia live when she held the secret in her hands? The brass ring lay cold in her palm, burning like a scar. It was not a ring, but a vow made by dead women. Julia realized she was no longer alone in her grief. She was the one with a mission. The solitude of Pandateria had suddenly become a tomb of deadly secrets, and she was its sole keeper. The parchment containing Agrippina's confession was a double-edged sword. It could be the key to freedom or the ultimate death sentence. Julia knew she could not keep this secret forever. Augustus had failed to kill the truth with Agrippina's death, but if he knew she had found it, her death would be swift and unsuspecting. Now, survival is no longer the goal. Julia's goal is to pass on the secret. She began to observe the guards, not with fear, but with the eyes of a caged bird searching for a crack in the cage. They were unfeeling, obedient machines. But there was one young soldier, his face always thoughtful, his eyes a little tired. He did not show the contempt or cruelty of the others. Julia sensed a deep disappointment in those eyes, as if he were also a prisoner of this empire. This, she decided, was her only hope. Julia began to act, not by begging or cajoling, but calmly and intelligently. She began with stories. Stories of Rome, of what happened behind the stone walls. She spoke of parties, of plays, of artists. She brought him back to the world he had left. An invisible bond was formed, not between a prisoner and a jailer, but between two lost souls. Julia noticed that he listened, not out of curiosity, but out of a yearning for another life. One night, when the wind howled like the wailing of Pandateria, Julia called him near. She took out the ring Agrippina had left her, the captive eagle, and gave it to him. "Take this ring to Rome," she whispered, her voice stronger than ever. "Find a woman who sells rare dyes in the Trans-Tiberian market. Tell her, the eagle has landed. She will understand." The young soldier looked at the ring, then at Julia. She was no longer a sinner. She was a queen. He hesitated, uncertain. This was an act of betrayal, one that could cost him his life. But Julia's eyes, filled with trust and desperation, convinced him. He nodded, clasped the ring in his hand, and hid it. Julia felt a breathless sense of relief. The final card had been played. The next morning, the supply ship arrived. The young soldier boarded it, and Julia stood on the rocks watching. Her heart pounded with each wave. Was it real hope? She saw him, standing on the deck, turning to look at her one last time, a bright, promising smile. Julia smiled back. She felt that, after all these years, she had finally done something meaningful, not for Augustus or for Rome, but for herself. But then, a small, fleeting detail shattered all hope. As the boat moved away, the young soldier nodded slightly to a senior soldier standing on the shore. A secret nod, almost imperceptible. The senior soldier responded with a cold wink. They both smiled, a mysterious smile. Julia felt her blood run cold. It turned out that he had not been assigned to guard her by accident. He was not a lone soldier. He was a spy. The entire conversation, the entire story, had been planned and monitored. Julia was not a brave woman seeking freedom, but a pawn in a cruel game. Augustus did not want to simply imprison her. He wanted to control her every breath, her every thought, her every fragile hope. The ring and the scroll, the secret of the captive eagle, have now fallen into enemy hands. And Augustus, far away in Rome, smiles triumphantly. He did not kill Julia. He let her live, let her destroy herself in false hope. What about the final card? It hasn't been played yet. The betrayal did not come with a punch. It came with a nod, a wink, a secret smile. Julia stood still on the rocky shore of Pandateria, feeling like a doll whose strings had been stripped. All her hopes, her efforts, her days of secret brooding, it was all a game she did not know she was playing. The young soldier, the man she had trusted, was not a savior. He was a tool, an eye for Augustus. She had given him everything. Agrippina's ring, a dead woman's confession, the entire secret of the captive eagle. It was all on its way, back to Rome now. She had lost. She had fallen into a trap so subtle she didn't even realize it until it was too late. Augustus didn't just want to exile her. He wanted to break her. He wanted to see her fall, to see her give herself up, confess her secrets, to prove that she was truly broken. But then a thought flashed through Julia's mind, a truth colder and more brutal than betrayal. Augustus was not a father punishing his daughter. He was an emperor defending the throne. But his fear was not political intrigue or rebellion. It was a deeper fear, a primal fear that he had tried to hide behind every law, every false honor. Augustus, who quelled civil war and brought peace to Rome, built his empire on a foundation of order. He controlled everything from politics to morality. But there was one thing he could not control: chaos. Julia, with her free spirit, her reckless love affairs, her quiet rebellious spirit, was the embodiment of that chaos. She was the embodiment of ancient Rome. A free, explosive Rome, unfettered by the rigid rules he had laid down. He couldn't kill her openly. After all, she was his only daughter, a beloved symbol of his people. But he had to do something. He had to break her will, make a lesson out of her. The Pandateria was not a prison, but a psychological laboratory. Every deprivation, every isolation, every crushed hope was part of his plan. The death of Agrippina the Elder, the whispers of the captive eagle, and even the appearance of the young soldier were all part of a larger drama. A drama staged to see if she had the strength to resist. And now, she understood. The game was up. She had lost. Augustus had the secrets of the women who had rebelled against him. He had eliminated the threat, but he had not been able to take away the last thing she had: her pride. Julia no longer cried, no longer despaired. The collapse was over. Now, all that was left was calm. She looked out to sea, where the spy's boat had disappeared. Her secrets, she knew, were worthless, because her last card, the one thing Augustus could not control or possess, was not a ring or a parchment. It was silence. Julia chose to survive, not out of cowardice, but out of silence. She refused to write letters of plea. She refused to confess further. She refused any form of contact with Rome, with her father. She would not let him see how broken she was. She would not let him see the pain of a broken soul. She would live in utter solitude as a reminder that however much he controlled everything, however much he broke everything, he could not destroy it all. As the years passed, Pandateria became a part of Julia, and Julia became a part of Pandateria. She grew old, her body weakened, but her eyes remained calm and defiant. She had survived, not by fate or luck, but by her iron will. She had won a battle that no one knew about, a battle that required no weapons or words. She simply refused to submit. Julia died in 14 AD, the same year as her father, Emperor Augustus. Her name is mentioned only in historical records by the men who abandoned her. There is no tombstone, there is no memorial. But her story remains, a mysterious whisper buried beneath the sands of history. A story of a woman who dared to live, to love, to rebel, and in the end, dared to choose silence to protect her soul, turning her own death into the greatest accusation.